beneath the rolling mists of Japan's ancient valleys, long before cities of light and steel reached for the sky, the land whispered in the rhythm of rice. It was more than a grain. It was life itself, the heartbeat of a people whose existence was braided with the soil and the seasons. The first paddies shimmered like mirrors beneath the morning sun, their waters reflecting a civilization just beginning to find its soul through cultivation. In these mirror fields, or Tanada, the Japanese discovered not merely sustenance, but identity. Every stalk that rose from the mud carried with it an understanding that nourishment and nature were one, that to eat was to honor the earth and the gods who breathed life into it. In the earliest villages, rice was not food in the modern sense. It was offering, it was prayer. Archaeologists still uncover shards of pottery, scorched black with traces of ancient grains, evidence of rituals where harvests were celebrated with solemn joy. The people believed that within each grain resided a spirit, the Ine no Kami, and when the harvest was abundant, it was said the gods smiled upon them. The act of eating became a sacred conversation, a moment in which the divine and the human shared the same table. As centuries unfolded, the cultivation of rice transformed not only the landscape, but the collective consciousness. Communities gathered around the rhythms of planting and harvest. Villages synchronized their lives to the lunar calendar, celebrating Ninamasai, the harvest festival where the emperor himself offered newly harvested rice to the deities, symbolizing gratitude and continuity. The steaming bowl placed upon a family's hearth was more than sustenance. It was a reaffirmation that the cycle of life endured, that harmony between heaven, earth, and humankind remained intact. In the steady ritual of planting and reaping, of washing rice until the water ran clear, there emerged a cultural language of mindfulness and respect, an ethos that would shape every bite of Japanese cuisine for millennia. But even in these ancient beginnings, Japan's culinary destiny was never entirely insular. The sea that encircled the islands was both barrier and bridge, a shimmering threshold across which ideas, technologies, and tastes would drift like wind-borne seeds. From the Asian continent came whispers of innovation, the art of fermentation, the secrets of preserving flavor through transformation. Travelers from the Korean peninsula brought the early knowledge of wet rice agriculture, and with it, the first techniques that would later blossom into miso, soy sauce, and sake. These were not foreign invasions of taste, but gentle absorptions, adaptations filtered through Japan's deep sense of refinement and order. Fermentation, in particular, became a quiet revolution. What began as necessity, making the fleeting bounty of harvest last through harsh winters, evolved into a philosophy of flavor. In the patient darkness of earthen jars, grains and beans transcended their simple forms, reborn through the invisible work of microbes. Miso took shape in these shadows, a paste of fermented soybeans and rice or barley that pulsed with the savory depth later known as umami. Soy sauce followed, a liquid amber distilled from the same alchemy, a balance of salt, sweetness, and subtle bitterness that would come to define the Japanese palate. These flavors did not shout, they whispered, revealing their complexity only to those who lingered long enough to listen. Even before words like umami were coined, the Japanese had an intuitive grasp of balance and restraint in food. The ancient diet was not extravagant, but it was deliberate. Rice anchored every meal, joined by seasonal vegetables, river fish, wild greens, and occasionally small portions of meat or fowl. Each dish was an expression of what the land offered in that moment. To eat out of season was to eat out of harmony. This deep attunement between nourishment and nature, the sense that a meal should mirror the fleeting beauty of a cherry blossom, became a defining current that flowed through centuries of Japanese cooking. Religious practice wove itself through the act of eating with seamless grace. Shinto, Japan's indigenous spirituality, revered the spirits of nature in every stone, stream, and stalk of rice. Food, in this worldview, was not merely physical. It was a medium of communication between worlds. The shrine, often at the heart of a community, would host rituals where rice, sake, salt, and fish were presented to the kami. The offerings were later shared among the people, a symbolic communion that blurred the line between divine blessing and human gratitude. The simplicity of these rituals belied their profundity. To cook and to serve was to participate in creation itself. As Buddhism arrived from China via Korea around the 6th century, it brought new philosophies that gently reshaped Japan's relationship with food. The Buddhist principle of non-violence led to periods of abstaining from meat and the celebration of plant-based simplicity. The temple kitchens of Nara and Kyoto became sanctuaries of quiet innovation, where monks developed shojin ryori, devotional cuisine rooted in vegetables, grains, and tofu. Each dish was prepared with meditative intention, designed to nourish body and spirit in equal measure. There was no waste, no extravagance. A single radish leaf might be repurposed into pickles. A leftover broth might become the base for another meal. Through this frugality emerged elegance, the Japanese genius for extracting infinite beauty from minimalism. In time, food became art, and art became food. The aesthetics of presentation began to mirror the philosophies of calligraphy, poetry, and garden design. A simple bowl of rice was served in a vessel chosen for its texture, its color, its quiet harmony with the season. Meals became stories, narratives told through the interplay of ingredients, the contrast of temperatures, the whisper of scent. Even the act of serving tea or placing chopsticks carried unspoken rules of balance and respect. To eat in ancient Japan was to participate in a performance, each gesture guided by centuries of inherited mindfulness. Meanwhile, trade and diplomacy continued to ripple across the Sea of Japan, bringing new ideas and ingredients. From China came the first soybeans and the earliest noodles. From Korea, the craft of pottery that elevated the dining experience from crude to ceremonial. With each influence, Japan did what it always did best. It absorbed, refined, and reimagined. The result was not imitation, but transformation. By the Heian period, courtly banquets in Kyoto had evolved into elaborate affairs where food was used to symbolize status and poetic sophistication. Nobles dined on delicately arranged plates of fish, rice, and seasonal fruits, accompanied by sake brewed in the imperial kitchens. Yet even in these heights of opulence, the ancient reverence for simplicity endured. Excess was seen as vulgar, refinement as restraint. It was during this era that the ritual of food became inseparable from the rhythm of daily life. Morning began with offerings to household gods. Evening ended with a shared bowl of rice. The emperor's meals were mirrors of national identity, reflecting harmony between the human and natural world. Farmers bowed before paddies before sowing. Priests blessed the harvest before it was eaten. Every gesture, every bite, reaffirmed the delicate contract between people and the divine. This was the unseen root system from which all later Japanese culinary innovation would grow. The taste of Japan was being shaped not in royal kitchens or markets, but in the silent communion between land and life. The wet scent of earth after rain, the sweet steam rising from freshly cooked rice, the faint salt of the sea carried on the wind. These were the primordial flavors from which the Japanese palate emerged. It was a language of subtleties, of patience, of awareness. A cuisine that would one day dazzle the world began not with extravagance, but with reverence. In the next millennium, that reverence would collide with change. The rice paddies would give way to bustling cities. The spiritual act of eating would encounter the pragmatic hunger of commerce. Yet through every transformation, the old soul of Japanese food, the whisper of rice, the prayer before the meal would remain intact, echoing quietly beneath the clamor of progress. For in every bowl of ramen, in every delicate piece of sushi, there still lingers the taste of the first harvest, the offering placed upon a Shinto altar, the moment when humanity and nature first dined together beneath the watchful eyes of the gods. The hum of Japan began to change. Where once the rhythm of life was measured by the rise and fall of the rice harvest, it now pulsed with the beat of footsteps on stone, the creak of merchant carts, and the chatter of crowded streets. The land of fields and shrines was becoming a land of towns and trade. The Edo period, an age of peace after centuries of warfare, arrived not with fanfare, but with a quiet revolution that would forever alter how Japan cooked, ate, and drank, becomes a land of towns and trade, and imagined itself. For the first time in its long history, Japan found itself united under a single rule. Tokugawa Ieyasu's shogunate sealed the nation's borders from the outside world, locking it into a self-contained experiment of isolation. Yet inside that closed shell, something remarkable began to grow. Edo, today's Tokyo, swelled into one of the largest cities on earth. Samurai sheathed their swords to take up posts as bureaucrats. Merchants flourished, artisans thrived, and commoners, for the first time, tasted leisure. With peace came prosperity, and with prosperity came appetite. The kitchens of Edo became laboratories of creativity. The old relationship between food and the divine remained, but now it mingled with the pragmatic joys of daily life. The act of eating shifted from ritual to recreation, from duty to pleasure. Markets teemed with life, fishmongers calling out their catches, vendors grilling skewers of eel over glowing coals, the air thick with smoke and laughter. Japan's culinary world, once defined by ceremony and restraint, found itself intoxicated by invention. Regional identities began to crystallize through flavor. The geography of Japan, its mountains, rivers, and coasts, became the stage for a culinary mosaic. Kyoto, the ancient capital, remained elegant and restrained, its cuisine steeped in imperial refinement and the quiet spirituality of temple cooking. Osaka emerged as the nation's kitchen, a mercantile hub where traders and chefs alike elevated street food into art. Edo itself, brash and bustling, developed a fast, bold, and practical cuisine to match the tempo of city life. What had once been a land defined by a single grain now became a nation defined by regional flavor. At the heart of this transformation was a paradox. The Tokugawa shogunate's sakoku, the policy of national seclusion, cut Japan off from most of the world. Foreign ships were turned away, Christianity banned, outside trade restricted to a small Dutch outpost in Nagasaki. And yet, in this deliberate isolation, Japanese culture blossomed with an intensity that astonished even its own people. Deprived of foreign novelty, artisans and cooks turned inward, perfecting what they already had. Food became a craft to be mastered, not merely consumed. A bowl of noodles could take a lifetime to perfect. A slice of fish, a meditation on balance. Constraint, it seemed, was the mother of creativity. It was in this fertile soil that sushi was born, not the refined delicacy of modern omakase counters, but a humble street snack designed for the city's restless energy. Before refrigeration, preservation was essential. Fish was often fermented with rice to extend its life, producing narezushi, a pungent, sour ancestor of the sushi we know today. But in Edo's markets, time was a luxury. Street vendors began pressing vinegared rice with fresh fish, creating a quick, portable meal that could be eaten on the go. It was the world's first fast food, served from wooden stalls, wrapped in bamboo leaves, and devoured by workers hurrying between shifts. Nigiri sushi, the hand-pressed sushi of Edo, was a revolution of both taste and tempo, a perfect marriage of speed and craftsmanship. Imagine the scene. A narrow street in Edo, lanterns glowing with soft orange light, the air alive with the scent of soy, grilled fish, and sweet sake. A vendor's knife flashes under the lamplight as he slices tuna, amberjack, or eel, each piece laid over a compact mound of rice, seasoned with vinegar and salt. The customer eats standing, chatting, drinking, perhaps pausing to watch a kabuki actor or a storyteller perform nearby. Food was no longer confined to the home or temple. It had become a shared urban experience, a stage on which ordinary life played out. This democratization of dining transformed Japan's social fabric. The merchant class, once dismissed by samurai as lowly traders, found new power in taste. They became patrons of the arts, collectors of fine ceramics, and connoisseurs of flavor. The rise of ukiyo, the floating world, reflected this newfound pleasure-seeking spirit, a culture of tea houses, theaters, and food stalls that celebrated life's impermanence with joyous indulgence. Painters like Hokusai and Hiroshige immortalized not only landscapes, but also meals. The glistening sheen of eel, the delicate steam from a rice bowl, the subtle color of pickled plums. Food was art, and art was food. In the closed world of Edo, foreign ingredients were rare, but imagination filled the gaps. Soy sauce production flourished, as did mirin, sweet rice wine, and miso. These became the elemental trinity of Japanese cooking, the building blocks of a flavor language that could express sweetness, salt, sourness, and umami in endless permutations. Broths simmered gently in homes and restaurants alike, each one a patient layering of time and care. Dashi, the delicate stock made from kombu seaweed and dried bonito flakes, emerged as the hidden skeleton of Japanese cuisine, an invisible backbone that would later carry the weight of dishes from miso soup to ramen. The Edo kitchen was defined by precision and purity. Knives were crafted with the same meticulousness as samurai swords, their steel folded and honed to achieve perfect balance. The cut of a vegetable was an expression of the chef's soul, its angle, its texture, its quiet dialogue with the season. Nothing was left to chance. Even the placement of dishes on the table followed patterns of harmony and contrast. A meal was not a sequence of flavors, but a choreography of sensations. And yet, despite this meticulous artistry, Edo's food remained grounded. The people's palate favored honesty over excess. Rice, of course, remained central, but it was joined by grilled fish, pickled vegetables, miso soup, and noodles. Simple foods elevated through skill. The bento, the portable lunchbox, became a symbol of practicality and care, its compartments a miniature reflection of the larger balance between flavor and form. Food was both sustenance and expression, the daily art of making beauty from necessity. As the merchant class rose, so too did the spaces where they gathered. The izakaya, Japan's answer to the tavern, flourished, offering sake and small plates to weary travelers and gossiping locals alike. Within these wooden walls, laughter and smoke mingled as friends shared grilled skewers, simmered tofu, or tempura, another culinary innovation born from Edo's creative confinement. Battered and deep-fried, tempura combined local seafood and vegetables with a technique adapted from Portuguese missionaries who had once briefly set foot in Japan before being expelled. The Japanese took the idea, refined it, and made it their own. Lighter, cleaner, a study in texture and timing. Every bubble of oil was a dialogue between foreign inspiration and Japanese mastery. Edo's isolation had not cut it off from the world entirely. Through the narrow keyhole of Nagasaki, a trickle of foreign goods continued to flow. Spices, sugar, new cooking techniques. But each was filtered through Japan's aesthetic sieve, emerging transformed. Even coffee, once alien and bitter, began to find quiet appreciation among intellectual circles. It was as if Japan could absorb the world's influences without ever losing its sense of self. The country was a crucible of refinement, where even a restriction became a source of beauty. The shogunate's rigid social order, samurai at the top, merchants at the bottom, seemed unshakable. Yet in the kitchens and streets, it was being quietly challenged. Food was the great equalizer. A samurai might dine on the same tempura as a shopkeeper. A nobleman might sneak out to taste a famous eel bowl by the river. Pleasure ignored class. The act of eating, so ordinary, so universal, became a subtle rebellion, a reminder that hunger was the one thing all humans shared. Outside Edo, the regions continued to develop their own distinctive tastes. Hokkaido's cold waters yielded salmon and sea urchin. Kyoto's Buddhist traditions kept its cuisine delicate and plant-based. Osaka, ever the trader's city, perfected dishes that celebrated abundance. Okonomiyaki, takoyaki, and endless variations of comfort food long before the term existed. Travel between regions became more frequent as roads improved, and with travelers came ideas, recipes, and cravings. The flavors of Japan began to intertwine, slowly weaving the patchwork of a national cuisine. In these centuries of peace, Japan's culinary vocabulary expanded into poetry. Dishes were named for the seasons, sauces for emotions, textures for philosophies. Food writing flourished, guides to famous restaurants, essays on tea and rice, moral reflections on gluttony and moderation. One could chart the evolution of the Japanese soul not through war or politics, but through what it chose to eat, how it chose to serve, and when it chose to stop. Even waste became ritualized. Leftovers were repurposed, bones boiled for broth, rice bran turned into pickling beds. Nothing was lost because everything was part of the cycle. As the Edo period drew on, the world outside Japan was changing. Steamships began to cross oceans, bringing news of revolutions and empires. But within the island nation, time seemed to slow. The old world held fast to its rhythms of rice and miso, of tea and sake. No one could yet imagine that within a few short decades, those rhythms would be broken, that the walls of Sakoku would fall, and that Japan's cuisine, nurtured for centuries in isolation, would be thrust into a global conversation it had never sought. Yet, as history would soon prove, Edo had prepared Japan well. The nation had learned how to take the foreign and make it its own, how to transform limitation into art. The culinary foundations laid in those narrow streets, those smoky stalls, those delicate rituals of cutting and seasoning would survive the coming storms of modernity. They would endure through empire and defeat, through occupation and globalization, carrying forward the quiet lesson of Edo, that to cook is to adapt, and to adapt is to remain alive. The taste of Edo did not end when the shogunate fell. It lingered, evolving, whispering through time. It can still be found in the crisp bite of tempura, the clean line of nigiri, the soft hum of miso broth. It is the taste of a people who, even in isolation, learned to find the world within themselves. When the first steamships appeared on Japan's horizon, their black smoke rising like strange clouds against the dawn, it was as if the future itself had arrived on the tide. The year was 1853, and Commodore Matthew Perry's fleet broke more than just the calm surface of Edo Bay. It shattered centuries of isolation. The island nation, long content within the cocoon of its own perfection, was forced to open its eyes to a wider, hungrier world. The era of seclusion ended not with rebellion from within, but with a knock from beyond. And when Japan opened its doors, the scents and flavors of the world came rushing in. The Meiji Restoration that followed in 1868 was not simply a political revolution. It was a transformation of the soul. Feudal hierarchies dissolved, the shogunate fell, and the emperor, long a silent symbol, became the face of modernization. Railways stretched across the landscape like veins of ambition. Telegraph lines hummed with new ideas, and the Western world flooded in with its machinery, fashions, and inevitably, its foods. Japan, eager to be recognized as equal to the great powers of Europe, looked westward for inspiration. In the process, it began to question everything it thought it knew, even the way it ate. For centuries, meat had been taboo in Japan. Rooted in Buddhist principles and reinforced by imperial edicts, the avoidance of flesh from four-legged animals was as much moral as culinary. The Japanese palate had evolved around vegetables, fish, and grains, building its complexity through subtlety rather than heaviness. But the West brought with it new appetites: beef, butter, milk, bread, coffee, foods that seemed alien, almost barbaric, to traditional sensibilities. Yet to the reformers of the Meiji era, these were symbols of progress, of strength, of the industrialized vitality that Japan now sought to emulate. The emperor himself, in a symbolic act that would ripple through every home in the nation, publicly ate beef. It was an event that shocked the old guard and thrilled the new. Newspapers hailed it as a step into modern civilization. Suddenly, restaurants serving meat, gyunabe, beef hot pot, became fashionable gathering spots for intellectuals and bureaucrats. The aroma of sizzling fat, once considered impure, began to smell like modernity. Still, the transition was uneasy. Some whispered that eating meat clouded the spirit. Others claimed it brought vigor and strength unseen in generations. For better or worse, Japan was changing from the inside out. In the bustling new capital of Tokyo, Western-style dining halls began to appear. Places where one might sit on chairs instead of tatami, where knives and forks replaced chopsticks, and where the menu offered strange delights like cutlets, omelets, and breaded chops. These foreign dishes, though novel, were soon adapted to Japanese tastes. The result was yoshoku, Western-inspired Japanese cuisine. It was a new category entirely, born of imitation, but maturing into originality. Dishes like tonkatsu, breaded pork cutlet, korokke, and omu rice became fixtures of the national diet. They were not simply copies of Western meals, but reinterpretations filtered through the Japanese spirit of refinement and restraint. Perhaps no dish embodies this synthesis better than tempura, though its roots lay in the techniques introduced by Portuguese missionaries 2 centuries earlier. It was during this era of change that it solidified its identity as distinctly Japanese. Crisp, delicate, and impossibly light, it exemplified the nation's ability to take something foreign and make it sing in a new key. Even the act of frying, once suspect in Buddhist kitchens, became a symbol of ingenuity, a willingness to embrace the unfamiliar without surrendering one's essence. The Meiji era was an age of paradox. On one hand, Japan raced toward modernization, embracing the technologies and tastes of Europe. On the other, it sought to preserve its soul, fearing that too much imitation would erode the subtlety of its culture. Nowhere was this tension more visible than in food. The old and the new shared the same table. A nobleman might dine on beef stew one night and miso soup the next. A scholar might sip black coffee in the morning and green tea in the afternoon. The Japanese palate was expanding, stretching to accommodate the world without tearing apart its own fabric. In this climate of transformation, foreign chefs and entrepreneurs arrived, opening restaurants that introduced unfamiliar flavors to curious diners. French sauces, British puddings, and American condiments began appearing in Japanese kitchens, often side by side with soy sauce and rice vinegar. The first bakeries emerged, producing loaves of soft, pillowy bread that would one day evolve into shokupan, the quintessential Japanese milk bread. What had begun as a novelty became necessity. What was once exotic became everyday. The borders between East and West blurred, not through conquest, but through cuisine. As Japan modernized, its people began to travel, not just across the islands, but across the oceans. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw waves of Japanese immigrants journeying to Hawaii, the Americas, and Southeast Asia, carrying with them the flavors of home. They found themselves in foreign lands with limited ingredients, forced once again to adapt. In California, the first Japanese communities began experimenting with local produce and seafood, laying the groundwork for what would later become Japanese-American cuisine. In Hawaii, plate lunch culture emerged, a hearty fusion meal that blended Japanese rice, American meats, and tropical flavors into a uniquely hybrid identity. These culinary ambassadors, often uncelebrated, were the first to carry Japanese food beyond its borders, sowing seeds that would bloom decades later. Back home, modernization also brought industrialization, and with it, efficiency. The first soy sauce factories appeared, transforming an artisanal craft into mass production without losing the artistry of flavor. Rice, once a measure of wealth and class, became more accessible. Urbanization created a new kind of eater: the city worker, the student, the commuter. Convenience and affordability became culinary virtues. The bento box evolved once again, now not just a symbol of care, but of practicality. Train stations began selling ekiben, boxed meals designed to be eaten during long journeys. Each region offered its own specialties, turning even travel into a gastronomic adventure. Japan had found a way to merge tradition and modernity into something profoundly human: food as both memory and motion. Yet modernization was not without loss. The pace of change swept away old customs, old recipes, old ways of gathering. Where once meals had been rituals of community, they now risked becoming transactions of sustenance. The polished lacquer bowls of Edo gave way to factory-made ceramics. The quiet clatter of chopsticks in a wooden home was replaced by the clang of metal in a city diner. Some lamented the erosion of simplicity, the vanishing of spiritual reverence in favor of material abundance. Others celebrated the diversity of taste, the newfound freedom to eat anything, to be anyone. The Meiji kitchen became a mirror of the nation's psyche, part nostalgic, part ambitious, always evolving. As Japan's influence grew, so too did its fascination with the scientific. The study of nutrition entered the national conversation. Government officials, inspired by Western theories of diet and health, promoted the idea that protein-rich foods, especially meat and dairy, were essential for building strong bodies and minds. School lunches introduced children to bread, milk, and curry rice, a dish imported from British India, but soon transformed into one of Japan's most beloved comfort foods. Japanese curry, thickened and sweetened, bore little resemblance to its spicy origins. It was a new creation altogether, a blend of empire and ingenuity. What began as imitation became ownership, a pattern that would repeat throughout Japan's culinary evolution. In the midst of these transformations, the tea ceremony, the epitome of Japanese aesthetic restraint, stood as a quiet anchor. In tea rooms across the nation, people continued to kneel on tatami mats, to whisk powdered matcha into froth, to bow before the steaming bowl. It was as if, amidst the frenzy of modernization, Japan still sought refuge in its own timeless rituals. The same could be said for kaiseki cuisine, the pinnacle of Japanese dining that evolved from temple meals into multi-course expressions of seasonality and art. Kaiseki chefs responded to Western opulence not with imitation, but with refinement. Each dish, each leaf, each grain of salt was placed with precision, a whispered reminder that progress need not mean abandonment. By the early 20th century, Japan had fully entered the global stage. Its cities sparkled with electric light, Its people wore Western suits and carried pocket watches. Its kitchens hummed with both tradition and innovation. Tokyo's restaurants offered everything from French haute cuisine to soba noodles served by lantern light. The country had become a culinary crossroads, but one defined by control. Unlike the chaotic fusion of other colonial powers, Japan's encounter with Western food was measured, intentional. Every borrowed idea was absorbed, transformed, and made to serve the Japanese ideal of harmony. Yet beneath this harmony, storm clouds gathered. Industrial progress carried the shadow of imperial ambition. The same drive that modernized Japan also pushed it toward expansion, first into Asia, then into the world. As the 20th century marched toward war, food once again became political. Rice was rationed, meat scarce, and luxury forbidden. The table became a battlefield of ideology, a reminder that even in modernity, sustenance was power. But those years of deprivation would later sow another transformation, one that would propel Japanese cuisine far beyond its shores. For now, though, at the twilight of the Meiji era, the taste of change lingered in the air. The hiss of frying oil, the scent of coffee, the sweetness of milk bread cooling by a window, all carried the same unspoken truth. Japan had learned not only to consume the world, but to translate it. What began as imitation had become innovation. What was foreign had become familiar. The Japanese table was now a reflection of the world itself, a place where East and West, past and future, could sit down together and share a meal. And somewhere in that great simmering pot of transformation, the seeds of the next revolution were already cooking. The post-war years, when scarcity would breed creativity, when a battered nation would rediscover itself through taste, and when Japanese food, once confined to its islands, would begin its extraordinary journey across the globe. When the fires finally dimmed and the smoke lifted from the ruins, Japan found itself tasting ashes. Cities lay broken, the air still heavy with the scent of loss and burnt rice. The once mighty empire had collapsed into hunger. Markets stood empty, pots clanged with nothing inside them but memory. Yet, in that silence, between the hollow sound of empty bowls and the cautious footsteps of people rebuilding, something delicate began to stir. Out of scarcity would come reinvention. Out of defeat, a new flavor of resilience. In the immediate years after 1945, food was survival, not art. Families queued for rations that never seemed enough. Rice, the nation's lifeblood, was so scarce that people mixed it with barley, millet, even crushed sweet potatoes to stretch a single meal. Black market stalls flickered at night like small constellations of defiance, trading soy sauce, dried fish, and American canned goods that had found their way from occupation forces to local hands. Every mouthful was improvised, a quiet act of endurance. The once refined culinary traditions of Edo and Meiji seemed impossibly distant, like dreams remembered through hunger. The American occupation brought strange new tastes to the Japanese table. Bread, spam, chocolate, chewing gum, instant coffee, powdered milk. At first they were novelties, then necessities. Children who had never known sweetness bit into Hershey bars distributed by soldiers and felt an alien joy. Housewives learned to cook with canned meat, adjusting old recipes to suit new ingredients. And slowly, inevitably, a fusion began. Not out of curiosity this time, but out of need. The occupiers' rations became part of the occupied survival. When General MacArthur's administration introduced wheat and soy imports to ease famine, Japanese bakeries re-emerged, selling bread rolls filled with red bean paste or curry. From hunger grew invention, and invention would become identity. In these makeshift kitchens, one of the most enduring post-war miracles was born: instant ramen. The story begins in 1958 with Momofuku Ando, a Taiwanese-Japanese entrepreneur, staring at the long food queues of a recovering Osaka. he wondered how a nation so skilled at refinement could still struggle to feed itself. Locking himself in a small shed behind his home, he experimented day and night with flash-frying noodles to preserve them. When he finally poured hot water over a dried cake and watched it spring back to life, he discovered not just a convenience food, but a revolution. Instant ramen, cheap, portable, democratic, became the taste of post-war Japan's rebirth. For a people who had lost almost everything, it offered warmth, speed, and dignity. The miracle of those noodles lay not only in their simplicity, but in what they symbolized: self-sufficiency reborn from scarcity. Factories soon filled with the hiss of steam and the scent of soy and garlic. Workers who once queued for rations now bought cups of ramen from vending stalls, their wages feeding both their bodies and their hope. Japan, hungry for modernization again, found in this humble dish a metaphor for resilience, the ability to adapt, to innovate, to turn necessity into comfort. While instant noodles spread through households, another current was quietly transforming Japan's culinary consciousness: the rediscovery of taste itself. Scientists like Kikunai Ikeda, who had isolated glutamate decades earlier, had given a name to Japan's ancient intuition: umami, the fifth taste. What the ancestors had felt in miso, dashi, and soy sauce was now scientifically validated. Suddenly, the world's chefs began to speak a Japanese word to describe the ineffable savor that made food satisfying. Umami became the country's first global export, not of product, but of perception. Through science, Japan taught the world to recognize what it had always known in its bones: that pleasure could be subtle, that depth could be gentle. By the 1960s, Japan's economy roared like a train racing into the future. Neon signs lit the night, department stores filled with Western luxuries. But beneath the gleam, the national appetite was shifting again, from sustenance to sophistication. Sushi, long confined to local markets and small counters, began to reclaim its artistry. Refrigeration and improved transport made fresh fish accessible even inland. And what was once a fast food of Edo's streets evolved into a symbol of refinement. Businessmen celebrated deals over sushi platters. Families saved for special nights at the local sushiya, where a chef's knife was now as revered as a samurai's blade once had been. Yet it was not in Japan, but abroad, that sushi would undergo its most astonishing metamorphosis. As Japanese companies and immigrants spread across the globe during the post-war boom, they brought their cuisine with them. In the United States, where steak and sandwiches still ruled, sushi appeared first as curiosity, served to expatriates in small Los Angeles restaurants, eaten by hand or clumsily with chopsticks. At first, Western diners recoiled at the idea of raw fish. But as the 1980s dawned, something changed. Health consciousness rose. Minimalism became chic. Japan's image as a land of precision and purity captivated the world. Sushi suddenly wasn't strange. It was sophisticated. Magazines hailed it as the food of the future. Lean, elegant, cosmopolitan. Celebrities dined at sushi bars. Journalists wrote about it with awe, and the California roll, a reinvention of sushi using avocado, crab, and cucumber, bridged the gap between East and West. Japan, once a student of foreign cuisines, had become the master, exporting not only its food, but its philosophy of refinement. To eat sushi was to taste the future, to partake in a ritual of quiet luxury that transcended culture. While sushi ascended to international glamour, other Japanese foods followed more quietly. Tempura restaurants opened in Paris, yakitori stalls in New York, okonomiyaki in Sydney. Each carried the same understated elegance that had defined Japan for centuries, the art of simplicity done perfectly. And yet back home, the Japanese palate continued to evolve. American diners and Western fast food chains arrived, tempting youth with burgers and fries. But instead of replacing local cuisine, these foreign imports were absorbed and reinterpreted. McDonald's served teriyaki burgers. KFC became part of Christmas tradition. Spaghetti met soy sauce and seaweed to become wafu pasta. Japan no longer feared foreign influence. It orchestrated it. The post-war decades were also a time of deep introspection. The trauma of defeat had left scars, and food became one of the quiet ways to heal them. To share a meal, to rebuild family dinners, to celebrate again, these acts stitched the social fabric back together. Rice returned to every table, now grown in abundance. School lunches ensured that children, once malnourished, grew strong. The national spirit, nourished by both tradition and innovation, began to bloom again. The kitchen had become the heart of the new Japan, where mothers mixed old recipes with powdered milk, where fathers returning from factories poured miso soup into bowls still warm from their wives' hands. By the 1970s, Japan's culinary influence had begun to ripple outward with deliberate intent. Chefs trained in Tokyo and Kyoto opened restaurants abroad, bringing with them a philosophy that emphasized purity of ingredient, respect for season, and balance of presentation. It wasn't just food they exported, it was an attitude. The concept of washoku, traditional Japanese cuisine rooted in harmony and nature, began to enter global consciousness. Even in the most modern kitchens of New York or Paris, chefs whispered its principles: that the plate should reflect the moment, that the cook should listen to the ingredient, that beauty was a form of respect. Meanwhile, ramen, the humble soul food of post-war streets, was evolving beyond its utilitarian roots. College students slurped instant noodles through sleepless nights. Factory workers ate steaming bowls at counters after long shifts. But a new generation of chefs began to elevate it into something more. They tweaked broths for depth, experimented with regional ingredients, transformed the dish into a canvas for creativity. From Sapporo's miso ramen to Hakata's tonkotsu, each region crafted its own expression of comfort and pride. What had begun as survival food was becoming a cultural emblem, one that spoke of endurance, resourcefulness, and warmth. It wasn't only food that carried Japanese flavors abroad, it was culture itself. As anime, manga, and pop music spread across the globe in the 1980s and 90s, they carried with them vivid images of everyday Japanese life. Characters eating bowls of ramen under neon lights, families sharing sushi at the dinner table, friends clinking cans of green tea at summer festivals. For millions outside Japan, their first exposure to the cuisine came not through taste, but through imagination. Food became a language of storytelling, a way for the world to feel close to Japan even before touching its shores. By the late 20th century, Japanese cuisine had achieved what few others had. It transcended its geography to become universal, yet remained unmistakably itself. The United Nations recognized washoku as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity in later years, a formal acknowledgement of what the world had already felt for decades. Sushi bars lined the avenues of London, ramen shops steamed in São Paulo. Tempura was served beside French wine in Michelin-starred kitchens. The Japanese way of eating, its mindfulness, its attention to detail, its reverence for season and simplicity, had quietly reshaped global gastronomy. And still, the heart of it all remained humble. The rice bowl, the miso soup, the careful act of gratitude before eating. Itadakimasu. For every skyscraper sushi lounge that sparkled above Manhattan, there was a family in Osaka sitting around a low table, eating grilled mackerel and pickles in quiet contentment. The sophistication that dazzled the world was only one surface of a deeper truth. Japanese food had always been about connection, between people, between past and present, between earth and spirit. As the 20th century waned, Japan stood once again at a crossroads, not of survival this time, but of meaning. Its food had conquered the world, yet it faced a new challenge: to remain true to its soul in an age of abundance. Chefs debated whether the art lay in innovation or preservation. Some chased global fame, opening restaurants in New York and Paris. Others retreated to mountain villages to perfect a single bowl of soba. The same tension that had defined every era returned: the pull between progress and purity, between the world's appetite and Japan's quiet heart. But perhaps the secret of Japanese cuisine lies precisely in this balance. Every period of disruption, be it isolation, modernization, war, or globalization, had not erased its essence, but distilled it. The same patience that once guided the planting of rice now guided the crafting of sushi. The same humility that once bowed before the harvest now bowed before the customer. The language of food remained the same: respect, harmony, gratitude. The post-war ascent of Japanese food was not merely a culinary phenomenon. It was a testament to the nation's capacity to transform suffering into beauty. Where once there had been hunger, there was now abundance. Where there had been imitation, now there was leadership. And beneath it all, the quiet whisper of rice endured, reminding every generation that no matter how far Japan's flavors traveled, they were still rooted in the soil of the patties, in the rhythm of the seasons, in the steam rising from a simple bowl. Beyond the gleaming sushi bars and the instant noodle packets, beyond the science of umami and the spectacle of Michelin stars, lay a single enduring truth. Japan's greatest export was not a dish, but a way of seeing the world. To eat, it taught us, is to listen, to time, to nature, to each other. To cook is to honor what was given, and to share is to heal what was lost. And so, as the century turned and the world became smaller, the Japanese table expanded endlessly, welcoming all who came with open hands and hungry hearts. From the ashes of war to the bright hum of global kitchens, Japan had found its voice again: quiet, graceful, unforgettable. Its taste lingered everywhere: in the slow swirl of miso in a bowl, in the sheen of raw fish against rice, in the comforting slurp of noodles on a rainy night. A taste that was once local had become universal. The world was now eating Japan, and through that act of nourishment, learning something about itself. If sushi became the ambassador of elegance, ramen became the heartbeat of intimacy, the taste of home carried in steam and broth. By the late 20th century, the humble noodle soup had transcended its post-war origins, leaving factory floors and crowded street corners to find its way into the hearts of the world. It was not refined in the way sushi was. It was bold, messy, comforting, endlessly personal, but that was precisely its magic. Ramen told a different story, a story of adaptation, of endurance, of creativity, forged in necessity. In Sapporo, chefs perfected the miso-based version, a thick, warming bowl ideal for the northern winters. In Hakata, tonkotsu emerged, a creamy pork bone broth so rich it seemed to embody resilience itself. Tokyo offered shoyu ramen, subtle and fragrant, reflecting the city's fast-moving elegance. Each regional variation was a narrative of geography, history, and resourcefulness, a culinary dialect as expressive as the language of its people. Yet all shared the same fundamental ethos: to coax maximum flavor from humble ingredients, to create satisfaction from simplicity. By the 1980s, ramen's journey outside Japan began in earnest. Immigrants and travelers brought the memory of steaming bowls to foreign streets, initially catering to Japanese expatriates longing for taste of home. But soon, curiosity led non-Japanese eaters to those bowls, slurping noodles while exploring the culture behind them. The first ramen shops in Los Angeles, New York, Paris, and Sydney were modest affairs. Neon-lit signs, checkered tile floors. Steam clinging to windows, the scent of broth mingling with conversation. Diners were taught, sometimes clumsily, to slurp loudly, a gesture of appreciation rather than rudeness. Eating ramen became a ritual of connection, a way to step into a small corner of Japan without leaving one city. Ramen's adaptability became its hallmark. Unlike the precise choreography of kaiseki or the austerity of shojin ryori, ramen welcomed improvisation. Broths were tweaked, noodles thickened or thinned, toppings multiplied and recombined. Vegetables, eggs, pork, seafood, mushrooms, seaweed. The possibilities were endless. And yet, each bowl was fundamentally about balance. The broth, the noodles, the aroma, the temperature. Too much of one element, and the spell was broken. To eat ramen was to understand patience and rhythm, the same mindfulness that had once governed the planting of rice, the ritual of miso, the seasoning of sushi. As Japanese popular culture expanded, ramen gained another champion: media. Anime, manga, and television programs celebrated the culinary life with an intensity never seen elsewhere. Scenes of characters hunched over steaming bowls, noodles dangling from chopsticks, eyes closed in delight, became global invitations. Ramen was no longer only food. It was narrative, emotion, identity. J-pop stars, manga heroes, and everyday protagonists alike carried its scent across the world, inspiring children, students, and workers far from Japan's coasts to seek out the same comfort. It became both cultural shorthand and culinary ambassador, a way to taste Japan through imagination. Yet ramen's globalization also sparked innovation. Local chefs abroad combined Japanese techniques with their own ingredients and traditions. Broths mingled with miso and miso-adapted spices. Noodles met local grains, and toppings reflected local culture. In New York, a ramen shop might serve chili-infused pork. In Paris, a duck confit topping might appear alongside a delicate consommé. And through these experiments, ramen demonstrated what had always been Japan's culinary genius: the ability to take influence, internalize it, and transform it without losing identity. Fusion, in this case, was not mere novelty. It was conversation, adaptation, evolution. Sushi, while the face of Japanese cuisine internationally, remained a symbol of precision. Ramen, by contrast, remained approachable and intimate. Its appeal was democratic. Students, office workers, travelers, families, all could share the experience. And in its universality lay its power. Japanese food was no longer just a set of flavors. It was a way of experiencing humanity. Communal, adaptable, joyful. It was a reminder that even in a world of abundance, comfort could be found in the simple act of breaking bread or noodles together. Looking ahead, Japanese cuisine continues to evolve, quietly, thoughtfully. Chefs in Tokyo experiment with sustainable seafood, local vegetables, and new fermentation techniques. Climate-conscious initiatives bring back ancient grains and heirloom rice, creating dishes that honor the past while protecting the future. Fusion is no longer only about novelty. It is a philosophy of sustainability and dialogue. The same care once lavished on a bowl of Edo-era miso now guides conversations about waste reduction, ingredient sourcing, and global responsibility. Japan's cuisine has never been static, and the 21st century sees it stretching, reshaping, and inspiring once more. Technology amplifies this evolution. Ramen now appears in virtual reality simulations, in chef competitions broadcast globally, in interactive cooking apps that teach students from Tokyo to Toronto. Artificial intelligence, food science, and environmental awareness converge to produce dishes that are as forward-thinking as they are rooted in centuries of practice. The global palate, once a passive observer, now collaborates with Japanese chefs, blending imagination with tradition. And yet, the essence remains unchanged. Flavor is supreme. Preparation is sacred, and sharing is fundamental. Even as Japanese food continues to globalize, it never abandons its soul. The steaming bowl of miso, the glistening slice of tuna, the gentle tang of pickled vegetables, all remain grounded in the rituals of the past. It is a cuisine that remembers where it came from. The rice paddies of ancient Japan, the Edo streets and markets, the post-war kitchens of ingenuity, the hands of immigrants shaping memory abroad. The past whispers in every bite. Even as innovation pushes the flavors forward, Japanese food's global journey is ongoing. Its influence is felt in kitchens from Seoul to Sao Paulo, New York to Nairobi, inspiring chefs to balance, adapt, and respect. It's celebrated not just for taste, but for its philosophy, the interconnection between food, nature, and humanity. Its narrative is one of endurance, creativity, and mindfulness, a story written in rice, broth, fish, and noodles, spoken in flavors that transcend borders. And in this story, ramen, once a modest post-war staple, stands as a metaphor for Japan itself, resilient, adaptive, endlessly inventive, yet profoundly grounded. Sushi and ramen, miso and tempura, soy sauce and umami, they are all threads in a tapestry woven over millennia, a testament to the quiet power of patience, care, and cultural dialogue. To eat Japanese food is to witness history, to taste geography, to experience a nation's soul. The world will continue to change, and with it, Japanese cuisine will evolve. New ingredients will arrive. Technologies will reshape kitchens. Global flavors will intermingle. Yet beneath the innovation, the heartbeat remains. Rice, broth, respect, and gratitude. Every bowl, every plate, every shared meal carries the same lesson the ancestors knew long ago. That food is more than sustenance. It is connection, memory, celebration, and love. From rice to ramen, from the patties of antiquity to the neon-lit streets of Tokyo, from the post-war kitchens to the global tables of today, Japanese cuisine has traveled farther than anyone could have imagined. It has survived, adapted, and flourished, teaching the world not only how to eat, but how to see the world, with attention, reverence, and joy. And as long as there are bowls to fill and hands to share them, that journey will continue, endless and unfolding. Each bite a bridge between past and future, home and world, tradition and innovation.